Right, you can see from the top of the page then we're looking at adult sentence types. So what type of sentence you could get when you are sentenced in either the magistrates court or the Crown Court. Okay, there's 4 types of sentences available then, and you can see them here. So they are custodial, community, fines and discharges. Now you do need to make sure, if the question wants it, that you include all 4 types. We'll have a look at potential questions afterwards, but if it is looking for all 4, so it says custodial, community, fines, discharges, or if it just says possible sentences for adults, you need to make sure that you include community, custodial, fines and discharges. Okay, now these sentences go in rank order. So custodial sentences are the most severe that can be given to you, whereas discharges are the least severe. Okay. Right, so if we look here then, it says that the sentencing powers are governed by the Crime and Disorder Act and the Criminal Justice Act. You need to make sure you've got these Acts of Parliament because you can't get into level 4 without them. Okay, so make sure that you've got the Acts of Parliament that are relevant. Right, so we're going to start off with custodial sentences. And custodial sentences are basically prison. Okay, that's what we're looking at here. The defendant being sentenced to prison. Now, because this completely removes your freedom, the judges are only allowed to sentence you to prison, or the magistrates are allowed to sentence you to prison if it is justified. Basically, it's got to be so serious that the only option would be to send you to prison. Okay, so it could be that it's so serious that the public need protecting, therefore the only option is to send you to prison. So in terms of what type of offenders will receive prison sentences, if you just want to fill in here next to it then, so we're looking at repeat offenders or violent offenders. They tend to be a major 2. Anyone that's a repeat offender that's getting worse, they will be sentenced there, and obviously any violent offenders would also be able to get sentenced there in order to have prison. So, in terms of prison sentences then, we need to have a look at what possible prison sentences would be available to the court, okay? Now, as you can see there then, the most important one is mandatory life. Okay, mandatory life. Now, mandatory life is only given for murder. So, use your M, and it's only given for murder. So anybody that commits any other offence isn't able to get mandatory life. You can only receive that sentence if you have committed murder. Okay? Now, if you want to fill in then the different types of prison sentences you can get for murder, you can get 15 years. That is your average murder. So one murder has been committed, you will get a minimum of 15 years that you'll need to serve. Now, you'll see this on the news. Some defendants are given like 20 years, 25 years as a minimum. That's fine, because the average life sentence, when we set it, the minimum tariff is 15 years, but it can be anything from 15 above, okay, for that one particular murder. 30 years would be if you are going to kill a police officer while they're on duty. Because they're in their uniform, it kind of makes it worse that you're committing that offence at that point, because really you're even more culpable because you know that they are in fact a police officer. And then finally, forever. So you can be sentenced to prison forever if you are technically classed as a serial killer, or if your murder is relating to children, so you've abducted and killed a child. So if you want to think of Mark Bridger, he abducted and killed a little girl, April Jones. He's serving a whole life term because of his crime. Or it might just be one murder, but the way you've done it might result in it being forever. So like Michael Adebayo, him and the other guy, Michael Adebayo, killed Lee Rigby. They beheaded him in London city centre. Now, because of that and how severe it is, he was given a full life term as well. So normally for forever, you're looking at committing multiple murders, 2 or more. But actually, depending on what's gone on, we could stipulate that you need to serve forever regardless. Secondly then, we've got discretionary life. So this is where the judge can choose to impose a life sentence, but he can impose lesser if he wishes. So if you want to fill in here, this is for crimes like manslaughter, robbery, and what it means is that the maximum we can put you in prison for is a life sentence, so it's up to 15 years, but the judge can choose less if he wishes. So, for example, if it was your first robbery, it might be that you only get a few years in prison, whereas if you'd done it a few times or it was a severe robbery, it might give you up to the full life term. So it's up to the judge's discretion as to whether he chooses life or not. Okay. Your third prison sentence there then is a fixed term sentence. So this is where you are in prison for a set amount of time. So the judge tells you the set amount of time he wants you to be in prison for, and then once you've done half of your sentence, they can let you out. So actually, you are in prison for a fixed amount of time, but then you're actually only serving half of that. Okay, factors affecting early release, if you want to fill that in then, that's things like good behaviour in prison, or you've done any programmes that they want you to do, you've shown that you're rehabilitating. So anything that goes in your favour will help you potentially to have an early release. Okay. Final two at the bottom of the page, then you can see there home detention curfew and extended sentences. So a home detention curfew allows us to release you from prison early and put a home detention curfew in place, which basically means you've got to stay at home, right? And how do we sort it out? We'll use a curfew, which means we'll use a tag to check that you are at home when you need to be. Okay, so home detention curfew is that one. Not obviously our same law because it's from a different country, but the famous Paralympian Oscar Pistorius, he's now been released from prison and he's on a home detention curfew. He's on a house arrest, which means he has to stay at his uncle's house. So same sort of situation there. And then finally, bottom of the page, then dangerous offenders can be given an extended sentence. Now, what this means is you have to serve your full sentence in prison, so you don't get any time off. Plus, we can give you up to 10 years on licence afterwards. So we can have up to 10 years after where we're making you do certain things, checking with the police station, we can have a supervision officer, we can put you on tag, we'll keep you on licence after, so we'll keep checking on you for up to 10 years. So this will be for dangerous people such as like sex offenders or really violent offenders that even though we think you're dangerous, we can't put you in prison for longer because when the judge sets the sentence, that's it. Unless it gets appealed. So what we can do though is check on you afterwards by having an extended sentence where we keep checking on you generally on a weekly if not daily basis. Okay, so that's 5 of your prison sentences. If you just want to turn over, we've got the other 2. So the last 2 there then, a minimum sentence and a suspended sentence. Okay, now minimum sentences are where if you've committed a crime more than once, you're known as a repeat offender, right? And depending on that crime, there will be a minimum time in prison you have to serve. So an example that you might want to fill in there then is if you commit 3 burglaries, you are going to be in prison for a minimum of 3 years, which is actually quite low in my opinion, for it to be fair. 3 years when you've been burgling somebody, but that's how it is. So 3 burglaries, the minimum time you would serve in prison is 3 years. Another type of minimum sentence, if you've committed 2 indictable crimes, so really serious crimes, you automatically have to serve a life sentence. Okay. So, 2 indictable offences would result in a life sentence. That's another example of a minimum sentence. So these are only used if you are a repeat offender, because obviously you've got to have committed the crime more than once. Last sentence then, suspended sentence. So this is probably the most favourable prison sentence for you anyway as a defendant. You'd want to get this one. The reason is you don't actually end up in prison. Okay, so if you should have been in prison for between 28 and 51 weeks, what we will do is we'll say, right, okay, we're not going to put you in prison right now, but if you reoffend within 2 years, we will put you in prison for the first crime and the second. The reason that we do this, mainly to give you a second chance, because you would be serving prison, but also because you'd be serving such a short time in prison. By the time we've actually got you into prison, sorted you in with a cell, got you settled in, it'll be time to release you again. So you'll be going through the revolving doors really easily. So actually what we'll do instead is we'll suspend it, give you the second chance, but if you do then reoffend, we'll make sure we sentence you for both. So making sure there that obviously you're not going to reoffend. Okay. Right, that's your prison sentences. So now let's look at community sentences. I'll just make this smaller so you can see. Right, community sentences then. The aim of these is to restrict liberty. So prison completely removes your liberty because you can't do anything. You're in prison. Whereas community sentences restrict your liberty. Okay. Now, the Criminal Justice Act created then the community order, which allows offenders over 18 to be given a community sentence, a community order. And it's kind of like a pick and mix at cinema, really. The reason is, what we are doing is we are adding requirements onto the order. So your order's a piece of paper. And with that piece of paper, you're given then loads of different requirements that can be added onto it in order that you need to follow. So hopefully, again, you're not going to reoffend. Okay, so the first thing we can add is an unpaid work requirement. Now, you've probably heard of this known as community service, right? But it's called an unpaid work requirement. So it means that between 40 and 300 hours, you need to serve in the community doing work. So if you want to check your examples, that's things like picking litter, painting buildings, building walls, sort of stuff that your council, I suppose, would be doing there. But you're doing it in the community, so you're paying back to the community there. Okay. Drug treatment and testing. So this is another requirement we can attach to your order. And this one is allowing some treatment to take place for drugs or alcohol. So if an addiction is a bit of a problem, the good thing is that it means that we can add in that you need to be looking at having some treatment for up to 3 years. Okay. We'll check that you're adhering to that by giving you regular tests. So because we're giving you regular tests, it will therefore mean that you are being checked upon and hopefully you're not going to reoffend. Okay. Third requirement then is a curfew. So you might have curfews already. Curfews are where we have to be in at a certain time. So as part of your community order, it might be suggested that you have a curfew for up to 12 hours a day. So if you're committing your crimes on the night, we'll make sure that you've got to be at home during the night, or if you commit them during the day, you've got to be at home during the day. So it's anything between 2 and 12 hours. But if you just want to add in there, then we'll often use a tag as well to check that you're all right. And that you're not going to reoffend, so we can keep an eye on you, really. It's cheaper than prison because it's about £700 a month to tag a person, or generally equivalent to about £4,000 or £5,000 a year, in comparison to £35,000 a year in prison. So adding a curfew and a tag rather than putting you in prison is obviously a lot more cheaper for us. Not saying it's the best option, but it is obviously financially better. Fourth requirement we could add then is an exclusion requirement. So making sure that you're not going to certain areas. So let's just say you're known for robbing shops. We're not going to let you near those local shops. We're going to exclude you from there. Or you're known for vandalising your local park. We're not going to let you in the park. So all we're doing is stopping you from going to certain places. And we generally check by tag again. Tag's always used for checking that you're not going to go back into that particular area. And again, it can last up to about 2 years. Final example that we're giving you then is a supervision requirement. So this is meaning that you've got to meet up with a probation officer for up to 3 years. So it could be weekly, it could be every other day. I suppose it depends how much of a risk you think you are. But you're meeting with them for a support basis and for them to check on you and make sure that you're not at risk of reoffending. Okay, now there is up to 12 requirements, but we're giving you the most popular 5 here that you need to be remembering. So make sure you include all 5, and just like your prison sentences, make sure that you're including your 5 prison sentences out of the 7 that I've just told you. As long as they're in depth, you are still going to get your full marks. Okay. Right, if you want to turn over then for the last slide. Right, the third thing we can do then is set you a fine. So the magistrates or Crown could turn around and say, right, I'm going to give you a fine now. Now, last year, 70% of sentence types were fines. So they are very, 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 very popular. More so by the magistrates court. They tend to set more fines than the Crown Court do, but they do have the ability, so that's okay. What we can do sometimes is set you a penalty, so we can set you maybe a community sentence, make you do a few things with that, but also add a fine onto it as well. So we've got the option there to sort of mix and match in that sense. Right, so as it says there, then the sum of money is paid to the Crown, not to the victim. I don't mean the Crown Court. What we mean by that is that the sum of money is paid back into the government, sort of Queenie, I guess, in that sense. So if you are given a fine, unless it is specifically stated that it goes to the victim, so like victim compensation or victim surcharge, actually it would only ever go back to the government in that sense. So the amount of fine that we have is based upon two things. If you want to fill in. So it's based upon the seriousness of your crime, how serious it is, and it's also based upon your income. There's no point them giving me a £25,000 fine because I'm never going to pay it. But there's no point them giving me a £25 fine because I'm not going to care about it because it's quite a small amount. So they've got to make sure that it's hard enough that it punishes me, but at the same time it's not that hard that I'm just not going to be able to ever afford it, because obviously that's unfair. So that's what they'll base them on, okay? How much you're earning, and then looking at how severe the crime is. So it's more tailored to you, whereas they used to do unit fines that didn't really take into account your income, and they were quite harsh. So now we base it on your income, and we also base it on the seriousness of the crime. Your typical offences that will incur a fine, generally summary crimes, so mostly like driving offences like speeding, littering will generally incur a fine. So it's your low level crimes really, your summary offences that are more likely to incur a fine there. Anything that's sort of a middle tribal either way or a top tribal either way, they're generally going to start looking at prison sentences. Your last sentence type then is a discharge. Okay, now discharges are only used for first time offenders. So if it was me, I would be a first time offender. So potentially if it's low level, I would be allowed to have a discharge. Okay, so as it says there, it's used for first time minor offenders over the age of 10, simply because you've got to be 10 in order to be convicted of a criminal offence. Two types of discharges then. We've got a conditional discharge and we've got an absolute discharge. So conditional discharges are where we won't really do anything unless you reoffend. And if you do reoffend within a set period, generally between 2 and 3 years, we will then sentence you for both. So add that in here where it says if they reoffend, we'll sentence you for both the first crime, which you got the conditional discharge for, and then the crime that you've just committed. We'll sentence you for both there as a result. Okay, so it's got to be a first offence, and it's got to be a minor crime that you've done, and then we'll obviously look at doing a conditional discharge. Okay, an absolute discharge is where technically you're morally blameless. So what we're going to do here is we're not going to punish you because you are morally blameless. We don't really see the point in sending you to prison. Taking you to court is probably bad enough in that sense. It stressed you out, scared you, you're sweating a bit. That's probably enough. Now, the old example we used to use was things like it was a crime to not have a tax disc on display. So if you didn't have a tax disc, then you would be breaching the law. Let's say that you've got it, but it's just falling onto your seat. Well, yes, it's not displayed, so you're breaking the law, but actually, realistically, are they going to put you in prison for it? Are they going to sentence you for it? Are they going to give you a fine? No, because it's there. So they'll give you an absolute discharge in that point. Also for things like, let's say it's littering. So you've taken your law folder out your bag to try and get your purse, and a tiny receipt is dropped on the floor. Technically, you've broken the law by littering, but are we really, really going to punish you at that point? No, we're not, are we? Because it's a tiny little receipt. It's accidental. Yeah, you've broke the law, but technically you're morally blameless. So we're not really going to do anything there as a result. Okay, so technically it's an offence, but it's so minor it would be stupid to even bring criminal charges against you, really. Additional marks at the end then, so other sentences that you can also get, you can be disqualified from driving. So that could be for things like you've been drink driving, or you've been driving without a licence, or it might even be things like you've suddenly got a disability like epilepsy, or you're going blind, so we have to kind of not allow you to drive for the safety of others. So not necessarily your fault there, but we can disqualify you. We can make you give a compensation order, which will mean giving money back to the victim. So at least that goes back to the victim there. And then finally, a restitution order. That just means if it's a crime like robbery or theft or burglary where you've taken something, we make you give that back. Okay? And that allows that to occur. Right, just a bit of a note that I want to talk about then. You need to make sure that you're reading the question for sentencing, because the area is very, very vague. Okay, so you could be asked a question that just wants you to talk about sentence types. It might not specify custodial, community, fines and discharges, but if it just says the available types of sentence available, it wants all of them. So you need to do custodial, community, fines and discharges, right? It might just ask for custodial sentences for adults and community sentences for adults. Okay. Again, if it's asking those, it's telling you in particular what it wants, in which case you are just going through custodial and community. So you really need to be careful in terms of what that question is asking there as a result, okay? Because if it is wanting everything, you need to make sure that you do everything. But if it's wanting set things, you would only need to answer those set things. Okay, right, so that's your adult types. So your 4 types of sentences that are available to the court. So you've got your custodial, your community, your fines and your discharges. Okay, all 4 of those can be given by the Magistrates Court or the Crown Court, and they're known as sentences, so sentence types, not aims. Okay, thank you.